You open the Hebrew Bible and Egypt appears almost immediately, long before Moses confronts Pharaoh. A single genealogical note links the flood narrative to the Nile Valley. Noah's son Ham fathers Mizraim, and Mizraim becomes the biblical name of Egypt. The text preserves that clue in its grammar. Hebrew adds "im" to mark a plural, hinting at Egypt's earliest reality, two kingdoms, upper and lower, joined only in later dynasties. Long after modern archaeology confirmed the dual crown, the ancient writers already encoded the detail in a single word. Canaan also traces back to this family tree. Ham's grandson bears the same name as the land Israel later calls promised. That repetition plants a narrative tension. The Hebrews inherit territory once settled by their distant relatives. In the biblical imagination, the covenant unfolds against an Egyptian-Canaanite backdrop rooted in common ancestry. The story insists that spiritual drama is never abstract. It descends through bloodlines, borders, and rivers. Those rivers matter. Annual floods of the Nile transformed barren sand into a green corridor, depositing mineral-rich silt and delivering agricultural surplus unknown to nomadic herders. Each inundation functioned like a predictable miracle, so reliable that Egyptian scribes designed civil calendars around it. Geometry literally arises from this cycle. Farmers cut temporary canals and remeasured fields after each flood, prompting priests to codify land surveying techniques. In Greek, geo means earth, metria means measure, and the Greeks themselves learned the craft in Egyptian temples. Generations later, philosophers such as Thales and Pythagoras traveled south for initiation, describing the Nile Valley as the era's open-air academy. Prosperity along trade routes amplified this innovation. Caravans moving between Africa and the Levant stopped at Nile ports, exchanging copper, incense, livestock, and stories. Cultural exchange accelerated whenever armies, merchants, or refugees crossed desert boundaries. The biblical patriarchs mirror that pattern. Abraham leaves Mesopotamia, wanders through Canaan, then detours to Egypt during famine. Joseph arrives as a slave, rises to vizier, and engineers grain storage that later rescues his family. These movements show the Torah's authors understood Egypt both as a threat and a refuge, a power able to enslave yet also to sustain. Modern historiography complicates how we read such accounts. Since the Annals school and thinkers like Foucault, historians regard every narrative as an interpretive monument rather than a discovered document. Facts remain vital, yet meaning lives in the architecture scholars build around artifacts. A sandstone stele, a papyrus hymn, a Hebrew genealogy, all become building blocks. Competing monuments rise beside one another, and readers must weigh whose foundations appear soundest. That approach frees you to compare Genesis or Exodus with pyramid texts and coffin spells without assuming either side owns absolute truth. Still, parallels between the traditions raise eyebrows. Consider Horus, child of Isis, hidden from a murderous king until adulthood. Centuries later, Matthew's Gospel recounts Joseph and Mary fleeing into Egypt to protect Jesus from Herod. Some commentators see deliberate echo. The safer place becomes Egypt itself, a reversal of the earlier bondage. Whether intentional or coincidental, such narrative threads reveal a conversation across millennia. Even language carries echoes. The Egyptian word ayah names a reed basket, the same object that shields infant Moses on the Nile. His Hebrew name relates to drawn out, yet pharaonic titles often included Ms or Mos, meaning child of. Thus, Thutmose reads child of Thoth. A Hebrew child raised in a court saturated with that suffix would naturally receive a hybrid name resonating in both ears. The Bible never lingers on the linguistic pun, but its presence reminds attentive readers that identities formed at cultural crossroads seldom fit tidy categories. Mythological overlap continues in theology. Akhenaten's short-lived monotheistic revolution venerates Aten, a singular solar disk dispensing justice and light. Scholars debate whether Moses, educated in royal circles, internalized strands of that creed. The Hebrew Shema insists on one God, indivisible and unrivaled, echoing the Aten hymns that speak of a lone creator whose rays vivify plants, beasts, and peoples. Direct borrowing remains impossible to prove, Yet conceptual affinity encourages fresh questions. How did ancient minds retool older images to articulate new revelations? Turn to Exodus and you notice how the 10 plagues read like polemics against specific Egyptian deities. Water to blood confronts the Nile god Hapi, darkness challenges Ra, death of firstborn subverts the divine status vested in Pharaoh's heir. The narrative frames Yahweh not only freeing slaves but dismantling a cosmic order guarded by Egypt's pantheon. Myth meets history through symbolic confrontation, blending theological drama with social liberation. At the same time, wisdom literature flows in the opposite direction. Proverbs 22 mirrors lines from the instruction of Amenemope, an Egyptian text advising humility, justice, and restraint. Hebrew sages did not hesitate to adapt foreign maxims, folding them into scriptural canon. They judged truth by its fruit, not its birthplace. As later Jewish scribes compiled the Book of Numbers, they included episodes showing lingering Egyptian influence inside Israel's camp. The golden calf incident evokes Hathor and Apis iconography, suggesting that some ex-slaves longed for familiar rituals despite newfound freedom. Prophets critique such nostalgia, yet their condemnations indirectly confirm how deeply Egyptian symbols had penetrated Hebrew consciousness. The relationship extends beyond texts into architecture. Solomon's temple features twin pillars named Jachin and Boaz, perhaps inspired by pylons flanking temple entrances along the Nile. Cherubim spread wings above the ark as protective guardians, recalling Horus falcons sheltering royal insignias. Even the tabernacle's portable design mirrors military shrines ferried by pharaohs during campaigns. The Bible positions these forms within strict monotheism, yet their silhouettes trace back to riverbank workshops. Archaeology surfaces more intersections. Excavations at Tel Habua near the Suez region reveal bricks stamped with royal seals, reminiscent of bricks Hebrews are said to make without straw. Although direct correlation remains debated, material evidence of Asiatic slave labor in Egyptian forts aligns broadly with the Exodus motif. Meanwhile, funerary art in Saqqara depicts Semitic traders wearing multicolored tunics centuries before Joseph's narrative, situating the biblical coat within a realistic cultural scene. Shared numerology illustrates additional confluence. Egypt revered the triad yet also structured cosmology around 42 nomes or provinces. Hebrew law delivers 42 way stations during Israel's wanderings. Whether coincidence or adaptation, the recurrence shows how numbers carried symbolic freight travelers could decode across languages. Genealogies, myths, and artifacts therefore weave a dense tapestry linking Bible and Nile. Still, multiplicity of voices demands careful reading. One author highlights deliverance from tyranny, another preserves Egyptian wisdom, a later prophet maps hope for unified worship from Egypt to Assyria. The canon becomes a dialogue rather than a monologue. Modern readers benefit from holding that complexity without collapsing it into conspiracy or dismissal. Some parallels owe to direct contact, others to shared human archetypes. Flood stories, for instance, appear in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Genesis, each tailored to local geography yet echoing a collective memory of water's destructive and regenerative power. Rather than accuse one culture of plagiarism, you can observe how each community retools a universal fear, cosmic deluge, into lessons suited to its destiny. Even polemics testify to closeness. Prophets denounce reliance on Egyptian horses, warning kings not to return to the house of bondage for military aid. Such warnings matter only because alliances were realistic options. Isaiah portrays Yahweh riding a swift cloud to humble Egypt's idols, a critique voiced by someone trained enough to enumerate those very gods. Intimacy breeds both borrowing and boundary drawing. Christian writers extend the pattern. In Revelation, the two witnesses are slain in a great city spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, fusing biblical symbols of moral corruption with imperial oppression. The early church interprets baptism through Exodus imagery, water closing behind believers as they leave slavery to sin. Simultaneously, Coptic theologians translate Greek doctrine into hieroglyphic imagination, adorning desert monasteries with ank-shaped crosses that merge resurrection and eternal life motifs. Through these evolutions, Egypt never vanishes from the Judeo-Christian story. Instead, it acts as mirror, foil, and tutor. Sometimes the reflection reveals idolatry to resist. Other times it unveils insights to embrace. A river that once fed geometry now irrigates theology, its currents flowing beneath parables, psalms, and liturgies. Approach the sources like an archaeologist of meaning. Distinguish layers. One stratum holds etiological tales explaining place names. Another preserves political satire. Another transmits ethical wisdom. Resist defining the Bible or Egyptian mythology as static monoliths. Both traditions mutate across centuries, absorbing regional accents and responding to shifting empires. Viewing them as living organisms helps you see exchange patterns rather than rival claims. Historical humility proves essential here. Early 20th century scholars tried to fix linear charts of influence, naming precise dates for borrowing. Later thinkers, learning from the Annals Revolution, swapped certainty for probability. They treat documentation as curated monuments, shaped by scribes with agendas, fears, and hopes like yours. That outlook invites you into the conversation rather than assigning you spectator status. What practical takeaway emerges? Consider your own narratives. You inherit ideas from families, schools, media streams, yet rarely notice how foreign concepts slip into personal belief. Just as Hebrews repurposed Amenemop's sayings and Egyptians adopted Semitic cattle cults, you weave unseen influences into daily ethics. Awareness lets you choose which legacies to amplify and which to refine. Stand again on Nile banks in imagination. Hear priests chanting hymns to Ra as sunrise flames red over lotus ponds. Across centuries, psalmists will sing, "The heavens declare the glory," echoing that dawn astonishment. Mythologies differ, wonder remains shared. Recognizing kinship inside difference enlarges respect without erasing conviction. Meanwhile, genealogies still speak. If Ham's children built pyramids and Sem's children penned Torah, the table of nations inside Genesis frames human diversity as family, not accident. Conflict grows tragic when kin forget connection. The Bible's persistent memory of Egypt, bondage remembered, wisdom borrowed, idols shattered, models how to wrestle with complicated relatives, oppose injustice, honor insights, refuse to caricature. You now possess a panoramic view stretching from antediluvian arcs to desert monasteries. 10 minutes cannot exhaust the relationship, yet it can shift perspective. Next time you encounter a proverb about humility, a plague narrative, or an ankh carved beside a cross, recall the river threading through them. History may be monument more than document, yet the stones still whisper. Listen as they invite you to bridge stories rather than barricade them, to acknowledge that faith traditions and mythic imaginations often drink from the same ancient waters. Silence settles after that realization. In the hush you sense rivers beneath words, genealogy beneath doctrine, geometry beneath liturgy. The Bible's authors and Egyptian priests could disagree fiercely, yet both watched constellations rotate above desert night and asked identical human questions. Where did we come from? Why does order falter? What power turns chaos into fertile soil? Their answers diverge, intersect, and sometimes merge. Your task is not to declare a single victor but to steward the conversation faithfully, adding your own measured voice to its ever-widening delta.